Welcome to Mad Men Men, where we gather in the creative lounge to discuss and analyze each and every episode of the AMC series Mad Men, shared between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of the show. One of us went through it just once back when it was airing. And then there is me, John Negroni, and I guess I had to spruce up a little bit because I was up all night thinking about this episode. Now, over here, we of course have Will Ashton, who never says thank you. Hey, Will.
Hello.
And of course, we couldn't talk about Mad Men Men without him, although sometimes we have to. It's Mike Overholst, and you're what the podcast is for, Mike.
That's Will's office, John.
Well, we're finally at the Suitcase. Mad Men Season 4, Episode 7. Widely regarded as one of the greatest episodes of TV of all time. And this was Will's first time watching it, I think.
Also, should be noted, this is the official halfway point of Mad Men.
How does that even work? Hold on.
Is that true?
I'm just telling you, that's what it is.
It's the 46th episode of Mad Men. I'm pretty sure that would mean there's 92 episodes of Mad Men?
There are 92 episodes of Mad Men.
That doesn't make any sense. We're in season 4 and it's 7. I can't do math. That's the problem.
Well, the last season's like longer, right? It's like an extra. It's split into 2.
It's split in 2, but
I put in a search to the old El Goog, and unfortunately, Will is correct for this prediction.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you never want that to be the case. That's for sure.
Fibbing, I'm telling you, this is the halfway point of Mad Men, and then subsequently the halfway point of Mad Men Men.
The last episode, the last season of Mad Men only has one extra episode, Will Ashton, so you kind of messed that one up. But anyway, so The Suitcase was directed by Jennifer Getzinger, and it was written by Matthew Weiner. Getzinger, long time, has directed episodes of the show before, but also just like a long time, I think, producer with Mad Men. Very much responsible for a lot of what makes Mad Men Mad Men. Mike, I want to sidebar with you here a little bit. Were you as nervous as I was with Will watching this episode? Because I just felt like Will's going to do that thing that he does, where he's going to be like, well, I guess I don't have a strong opinion of it one way or the other. Or like, I don't get why
obviously I've heard a lot of this episode, but when it was good, I just don't see, what all the hubbubaloo is about.
I wish I used hullabaloo more in my day-to-day speak.
Yeah, same here.
I will say, it's such a fun word. I have heard a lot about this episode, I should say. I mean, obviously not just from YouTube, but in general, besides it being, at the crosshairs of the show, it is an episode, like you said, it is very well regarded. It's highly referenced. It created at least 2 well-known memes. Obviously, you already referenced the one, that's what the money is for, but also the 26 is still very young is one I see passed around quite a bit, particularly among people who are insecure about getting into their later half their 20s. But yeah, I mean, it was one that I was very excited to see, and I am happy to say it lived up to the hype.
My goodness, Will Ashton, you're witty. I always suspected that. Turns out it's true. Trudy just... That's what she does.
She's really John's favorite character.
Trudy? She's up there. We get on.
I gotta say, I kind of forgot. I don't know if it's just because we record these in long spaces or whatever, but I kind of forgot that she was pregnant until this episode.
So when you saw her, you were just like, whoa, baby.
No, I was just like, oh, yeah, that's right. She's pregnant.
It's kind of the first 20 seasons of Family Guy Bonnie situation. Just constantly pregnant.
Hey, she has a baby eventually in Family Guy. This episode did get a nomination for Outstanding Writing for a Drama Series for Matthew Weiner. And John Hamm and Elizabeth Moss were both submitted for consideration for Emmys, but they didn't get the gold. But kind of wild, actually. This is a very different episode of Mad Men. Usually Mad Men has 4 or 5 different plots going on, different locations. Just this last episode, Waldorf Stories, was very expensive. They had to shoot all these different places. And for this episode, and it's especially noted in commentaries so Matthew Weiner did the commentaries with Chris Manley, the director of photography, and I forget the second person. He didn't talk that much, but I think he was one of the writers who's like been part of the show for a while. But they kind of were like happy to do this episode to kind of like save some money. Not as many locations, and it's just a simpler episode.
I mean, does this qualify as a bottle episode? Because I was of the impression going into it that it was going to be a lot more contained into the office than it was. I mean, it is obviously in the office a fair bit, but it's not centralized to that location.
Yeah, it's not
in a
strictly
way.
because you see Roger at the telephone thing. They go to the Greek diner. They get it's kind of got bottle episode energy though.
It is, yeah. It is bottle episode adjacent, but it's not like a traditional. It's not like Fly from Breaking Bad, where it's primarily in that one location. So,
yeah, and it was something that Weiner pitched a while back of like, I really want to do this episode that's just Don and Peggy focused. No other things. Like, we don't need Bobby Draper, getting shingles or something at school. Like, we're just gonna. I don't know why I picked that, but we're just gonna do this very specific focus thing on a tension that's been building between Don and Peggy. I'm sure, Will, you picked up on that. Like, she has not been happy with the Cleo stuff and all that drama.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's exclusive to just the Cleo snub. I think there's been a lot of resentment kind of building up these last 2 seasons in particular. But yeah, I mean, tensions were definitely mounting. And you guys, I think, deliberately or not, were kind of hyping that up as we were recording. I know you two are good about avoiding spoilers and keep me in the dark as best as possible outside of Twitter. But, I could tell just by the way you were speaking that things were going to come to a head either in this episode or in episodes to come. And they do come to a head.
They do. Yeah, especially because I think it's kind of realistic. It's a little true to life how the end of last season, which is a year ago and the timeline of the show, you do have Peggy and Don having a kind of denouement. Like, they do kind of like, he begs her to come join the agency. He's just like, "You're awesome, Peggy. I see you as a daughter." Well, he doesn't say that, but I think that's what she hears. And I think like a lesser show would probably be like, well, they already had that moment, but it didn't really like resolve anything because the stress of the new agency, and Don kind of has this resolve to like build something and to be successful. And he is really exploiting Peggy in a lot of ways. And one funny thing about that, and I want to get a Mike opinion because you know how toxic those can be. Weiner says that this episode you're supposed to, or at least he feels like he's been both of these people. He's been Peggy, he's been Don. And he kind of feels like that's how the audience should kind of read this, of like they go back and forth of like relating with Peggy, but also just kind of being like Don and just being like, why are you so obsessed with, your accolades and your words? Like the moment he was like, and honestly, like the way he talks to her is just so condescending. But yeah, Mike, have you been more Don, Peggy, or John Negroni?
That's a good question. You either live long enough to become the John, or you die a Peggy, I guess. But I think you have to live enough life, though, right, to understand both. And
yeah, 26 is still pretty young. Yeah,
26 is still pretty young. But I do think I've seen myself like be the Don. Because so long, I think you're the Peggy's in your career for so long that it's like the kid who got bullied in elementary becoming the bully in middle school because like he's just protecting himself, kind of thing. And I think it's easy to do. Like once you actually do start getting power and accolades, and it's like you don't realize you're doing it, but it's like, well, I went through it and it made me better. So now whatever, I don't care what I'm going to do to them. But yeah, I don't know. Have you been that, John?
Well, I just want to paint the picture because the listeners can't see Mike right now. He currently is wearing a 6-piece suit and he has like gold coins like he's twirling in his toes. And that is the biggest cigar I've ever seen. So, just so folks understand where Mike is beaming in from. Yeah.
Can you see the pool of gold I'm swimming in?
I have not really like dealt with a Don. I've just been maybe like in the very beginning of my career when I was working in public relations. Shout out to the name of the first episode of this season. But the job I've been at for, gosh, it's going to be 10 years next week. I've had bosses who are just not like Don. They're just way cooler, just good people. And they're just like, they don't take credit for things that aren't theirs, or they're not like, making me stay up all night to figure out a Suitcase commercial. Like things are kosher over here.
Well, congrats on your work anniversary before I forget.
Yeah, I just wanted to brag a little bit more, give you 2 more sentences. What about you, Will? I know you and I have definitely talked about work stuff for sure. And,
Sure.
I feel like you're a Don sometimes with me.
Oh, yeah, Will's definitely a Don. Yeah. Oh my goodness. The Don of the group for sure.
I mean, I was joking.
Down to a sex life, yeah.
Yeah. I was joking with you while I was watching the episode that I feel like I've had experiences like Peggy's boyfriend where, like we set a time to record and, I'm set up and I'm ready to go. And John's like, oh, hey, I have a work thing. Give me 5 minutes. Oh, actually, give me 10 minutes. Oh, actually, I'm probably going to be half an hour. Can you record on Tuesday? And it's like, yeah, sure, John. It's 3 a.m. for me, but
damn it, John, I got your whole family here. I got Nancy, Tyrone, the roommate, which is my wife.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I do have to apologize, Will, but I do appreciate you buying oysters for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was the least I could do, especially for Tyrone, someone who was very hard to persuade to get on a podcast in general.
Hey, he introduced me to oysters. So
is that true?
Yeah. He and my mom love oysters, and Melissa loves oysters. So we're just a shucking family over here.
Tyrone is at the top of my list of people I want on a podcast of ours, whether it's Cinemaholics or this one or even Rookie Pirate Radio. I want to get him.
He'd get bored after about 2.5 minutes and would just be like, all right.
That's one of the reasons why I'd want it, because it'd be so anarchic, it's like have I don't know what movie it would have to be like.
I'll talk to him. Like, I'm going to be visiting my parents in about a month, and no promises, okay?
Sure,
we're more likely to have one of my nieces or nephews on
Sure, yeah. But no, I like the idea of us bring him on for something like Deadpool and Wolverine or whatever, and he's like, yeah, whatever. It was kind of funny. Have you guys seen Sound of Freedom? No, Tyrone, I haven't seen that movie yet. Oh, you guys got to check it out. It exposes the truth. Those are the real superheroes.
I think, Mike, you were going to step in and talk about Mad Men real quick.
No, I was not. I was going to jump on the Tyrone train.
Dang it.
What would it be? I guess it doesn't have to be. What is the podcast you would talk about the most? What's your topic?
It would have to be politics, right? I have to assume.
He's a very political guy. He's very conservative.
But could it also be what the latest with Tom Brady? Could it be the Tom Brady roast?
No,
I don't think so.
No, he's a big Tom Brady fan. I mean,
is that right?
Yeah. He's massive Patriots fan.
I think I'm more disappointed in that than his political beliefs.
I mean, it's not like they're too far apart, but I would say that he does really like comedies. You could get him on a podcast being like, what are your favorite comedies? And he would probably just be like, I like this movie. Or he would probably tell stories about
Harold and
what it was like to go to the movies in the 70s and stuff like that.
Favorite comedies. First one, Sophie's Choice.
I've introduced my dad to a lot of movies he thought he wouldn't like famously Pirates of the Caribbean. I was a big John W. I convinced him to go to take me with him to see it. But
yeah, you were telling me,
guys, we're recording this the day before Father's Day. Why?
Yeah, happy Father's Day to all of our fathers.
We got to meet Mike's dad,
especially. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, especially Tyrone. Yeah, you were telling me a funny story when I was in Palm Springs about when you were at the video store and your dad persuaded you to watch some non-existent movie that was one of the worst things you'd ever seen.
Yeah, and so he was found the title of it,
and he was like, he was dead set this is gonna be like Goodfellas. You got to trust me, John.
Yeah, and that was one of the first times I realized that I might have a thing for evaluating movies and judging books by their cover.
Well, there you go.
Hey, you know what? It's great that you bring that up, Will, because that brings up a question. Does Don see Peggy as a daughter? Is Don kind of see himself as a father figure? This is a long asked question, one that maybe doesn't have the simplest answer.
I mean, there is that shot when they're listening to Roger's recordings where you see Peggy framed in the same shot as Bobby and Sally, like the picture of them, or the two pictures of them are like,
it happens a couple times in the episode, yeah. Where
sure.
you kind of see even baby Gene is kind of getting in on the action, where it looks like Don has to like put Gene as close to him as possible so he doesn't forget that Gene exists.
What's that kid look like? No, I worry every day about baby Gene. I really do. I just hope he's okay. I felt, even though I was concerned about Don's bender, I felt relief that Betty was taking good care of Gene during that whole situation. So, nevertheless, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't see it as romantic. It is a platonic sort of bond between them. But I think for me, what's fascinating about it is that obviously Don is someone who has built these walls around him, who has gone out of his way through this Don Draper persona to be as unvulnerable as possible, even in his personal life, like outside of the work setting, like someone who has tried very hard to not let his emotions, his feelings outside of like anger or elation or what have you, kind of dictate or move his persona and the way people see him. And subsequently, Sally, in kind of following that shadow, is someone who is inherently very prone to her emotions and someone who has used her emotions, I think, to kind of elevate herself, but also has had to kind of like hold back and realize that like she has to kind of bite her tongue and not let every kind of indignity and slight kind of get the best of her. But we see this episode where they have to come to a head where Don and Peggy have to, in order to move forward, kind of have to open up and break those walls they've built or tried to build. And I think part of the tension, but also the relief of the episode is just kind of seeing not only them come to heads and kind of voice their frustrations or whatever, but also just allowing each other to have these inherently human moments that they've kind of tried to go out of their way to avoid for so long. And I think that's a tense and scary, but also thrilling thing to watch for an hour-long episode of television.
Well, unfortunately, I don't agree with anything you said at all, Will. But I'm glad that you got that off your chest. And no, I'm just joking, of course. But I forgot to mention, this takes place May 25th, 1965. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the background, including the Muhammad Ali versus Liston boxing match, which kind of dates the episode specifically. And, Doug Phillips is having a drunk night of his own. And Anna dies. And yikes. So, Mike, you've had time to think about this episode as well. Why do you think it is so beloved? Like, why do you think people like this episode as much as they do? Not just critics, but I mean, I remember watching this episode just as a college kid who doesn't know his ass from his elbow. Like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. What about you?
Because I just think it gives viewers the catharsis that they've been dying for the entire first half of this show on things with Don and Peggy. Because it's never been a will they, won't they type situation. Like, that's never been an underlying theme. But there has been, from the secretary days to the baby to like the mentorship to like everything. Just like there has been a need, and like you get a little bit of it when he asked her to come to the agency, but you also just feel like he's schmoozing her a little bit, right? Like you feel like he's Don Drapering her because Peggy did want to be Don Drapered, but now I think you finally get like that moment on equal footing that they can have a conversation with each other, they can be vulnerable with each other, and beyond that, it's also just nice to see Don have someone in his life do that for him too, as a viewer. Because at this point in the show, he's like, I don't know, at his lowest, I guess. And I just think it gives the audience so much of what like you've been looking for, didn't even know you were looking for. It's just a very unique episode of Mad Men because of that fact too. Like because Warner's like, let's just do Don and Peggy. Let's not do the shingles with Bobby, as you say, John. But yeah, I think it's just it hits you right when you're not expecting it to. Honestly,
Weiner has this theory of when it comes to Mark, where he's just like, at one point, like you can see Peggy actually doing that, like saying to Mark, like, "Oh, I never get surprises for my birthday," but then he's like, but he is also kind of like trying to get in good with like her family and stuff. And so like to me, that kind of speaks to, I don't know, just how good the show is at just like taking something that looks kind of benign, like a good human action, and just like letting the audience also see that layer of like, okay, yeah, this guy's a little bit like, there's just something with it. I never liked Mark, weirdly enough. I think the show wanted me to love him.
A bit self-serving, I guess you could say, on his behalf. Yep.
Yeah. I absolutely adore the whole tape recorder scene because they have the big fight, right? And she finally is, she's telling Don stuff that she's just like been wanting to say for a while, with the Cleo and everything. And it's like Don just like, poof, like I wouldn't want to be yelled at by my dad like that. But then they just kind of have like their peace truce, right? Over Sterling's recording, which they use like the legit like tape recorder to make it sound like that, which is just such a great touch. But Bert Cooper, we finally have the mystery of Dr. Lyle Evans, like why Bert Cooper brought Lyle Evans up that one time, and like his like arch nemesis, and everyone's like, who is Dr. Lyle Evans? It turns out he neutered our boy Bert at the heat of his prime. And apparently he and Roger had this like love triangle with Miss Blankenship. And I just love it so much. Well, Ashton, I know you already suspected that Ida Blankenship was a Hellcat, but how do you feel now?
I'm just still kind of confused as to how that even happened. Like what? I guess they're never gonna really dive into like the particulars of that whole thing, but it raises a lot more questions than answers, I think.
What does? Like Cooper being not having his balls?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it explains a lot. Like, doesn't have any kids.
Sure. I mean, in the sense of like, I get his life. I just don't get the particulars of why he doesn't have balls at this point.
Oh, it just seems like he was misdiagnosed by the doctor.
Oh, I see.
Apparently, they thought that they had to like do a tracheotomy or something like that. And because Roger says like it was unnecessary. So
right.
Cooper lost his sexual drive unnecessarily, and he became an Ayn Rand fan ever since.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to do? And then Ida Blankenship, his secretary, she had to find it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And there was this sweet young kid, Rogers, straight from the Pacific Theater, just looking for love in all the wrong places, Washington.
Yeah.
Confusing about that.
I just feel bad for Bert, but I guess he's made it work for him.
Yeah, so I know with you, Mike, I know that you have you have your finger on the pulse of advertising. And I know, Will, you're a creative guy too. I don't want to count you out of here, but Mike and I, we just have this thing over here and you can't join the club. Not yet. But one thing about this episode in particular that I think does also add to its acclaim is just how good it is at depicting the creative process. And we've seen the creative process, obviously, in spades throughout the show of like, how do you come up with an idea? Whose idea is it? Weiner talks about this a lot in the commentary as well. And it's just, there's so much relatability there. And I was curious, Mike, if it's similar to kind of like how you've done that with your own sort of work when you're trying to like come up with something. I know like neither of us have done Suitcase commercials, but just like that whole thing where like you start the episode right with like the whole like Joe Namath endorsed, football thing. And I remember watching it and be like, yeah, it's fine. But, Don's just like, no, it sucks. And like the more I watch this episode, the more I'm like, yeah, Don's right.
Yeah, I would say I probably don't have like the exact one-to-one. And, sales is a creative process where you're coming up with pitches similar to what they do for like these customers, but a lot of times, yeah, it's not going into the night. I can tell you that much. I do think there's as much drinking involved though, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, fair enough. So this whole time then, Will was the one who was like, joke's on you, John. I've stayed up all night trying to come up with a commercial for not Suitcases, I guess, but who knows. But I feel like you can still get a lot out of, that sort of like feeling of like trying to do something that pleases your boss, trying to like come up with an idea, like that whole thing where like Peggy is kind of looking at him like, he's like, oh, you don't like the idea. She's like, oh no, I love it. She just wants to get out of there. It's just like, so like, it's so true to life.
It did that dynamic did make me think a lot of work. The like I don't want to be here. I feel like I have to be here without being explicitly told I need to be here kind of feeling. Like, especially now at this job where I'm working at a like little A-person startup, there's a lot of that pressure because everyone is also working so hard that you don't want to be the person who does leave and the situation is. And like that dynamic is still absolutely real. And that actually, on this second viewing of this episode, is what kind of hit me the most. It was like in my own life.
One thing I did want to say is I was kind of hoping at the end of the episode, as a little like epilogue, there is the pitch that they have with the Suitcase company, and they pitch this idea that Don came up with, and the guy at the Suitcase company is just like, boxing? Did you see that match that happened with Muhammad Ali? People hate it. That match ended less than a minute. Now, a sport that people love is football. And if you get a beautiful lady with it, why, you're cooking. Who are some big football players you can think of?
Don looks over at Peggy, and like Peggy's just like, shrugging, and then the theme music comes on.
Right, yeah.
But it's the Mad Men theme song, but it sounds like a 70s sitcom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I don't think the ad is very good, especially like, I don't know, when he's showing her the ad with the suitcase fight standing over, I'm just like, it kind of sucks. Like, if you're not, I'm not going to lie to you.
I mean, isn't that kind of the point though? Is like, Peggy just kind of wants it over. Like, they just don't really have like a good idea in general. Like, it's not that much better or worse than the football one. Like, I actually kind of like the enthusiasm that the guys have for the football one. Like, it acts well. Like, what's his name really gets into it as the football player.
Joe Namath. Yeah. Samsonite. It's tough.
Right. Yeah. I think it's like a kind of fun pitch. Like, it's not a great commercial, but it's a fun pitch, and they're getting into it and stuff. And I don't know.
This is like before the first Super Bowl, so it definitely was kind of like getting to, like, you know, it was kind of like capturing, I think, like football was starting to rise in popularity. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so there's a bit of Duck Phillips in this episode. We finally find out what happened with him and Peggy, because they were kind of an item in the last season, but a year went by and they are, you know, she started dating Mark. And we did see Duck in, I think, the last episode with the Cleo. The Cleo's like embarrassing himself. So he apparently lost his job, probably because of what happened there. And he's drinking again. And it just seems like his life is kind of like cycling back and forth with these spirals and everything. And I know, Will, you're the biggest Duck fan, and you're rooting for Duck, obviously, in his boxing match with Don. But did you feel good about it? Like, did you want, you know, did you want Duck to beat Don that badly?
I mean, the fight starts off funny enough with the classic, like, Don goes for the punch, way overshoots it. You know, they're tumbling on the floor, but then it obviously just becomes kind of sad and like, I like how it's choreographed in a way where it's not meant to be very exciting. Like, it's distanced enough to where you're just seeing these two middle-aged guys tossing themselves on the floor. Don has vomit on his shirt, and Duck's all disheveled and drunk as well.
Vomit on his shirt for so long. Yeah. I mean, it starts like a lot of things in the show. It starts off funny and then it gets kind of sad. But it did make me wonder, because I did really laugh at Duck getting ready to take a shit in what he thought was Don's office. I thought that was a great bit. I got a big laugh out of that. But especially when he like code switches. He's just like, he gets up, zips his face, like, I'm a fool for you, baby.
Yeah. I was wondering if this is the last time we see Duck, because it could be a sort of final moment. And the fact that you're usually one to tell me if it is the last time we see somebody. So it sounds like this isn't the last we see of Duck, but it does feel kind of final.
There are a few ducks, like the animal, that we see in the show. So, you know, very Soprano style. So sure. I don't want to mislead you. That's the only thing. You'll see it. You'll see.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say, everyone in this episode needs to get their ducks in a row.
I like that.
Yeah.
And technically, Will, just to keep you guessing, Mike and I don't always tell you when it's the last we see of a character.
Okay.
So well, you told me, but we don't do it every time.
You told me it was Sal for sure, though I didn't want to believe it.
That was out of necessity.
Because we didn't want to break your heart. Yeah.
You were like crying at a certain point.
Yeah. There are a couple other characters you've told me if it's the last time we see them, but All right, so this isn't the last we see of Duck. That's interesting to know.
I think this might be the last time we see Anna Draper, at least alive. And sorry, Mike, I didn't give you a chance to roast Duck. Get it? I don't know. I wasn't sure if you wanted to pour one out for your boy.
I just was sad that Don lost so bad. Duck deserves just to get his shit rocked. You know what I mean? Just a little mallard hunting.
I like it though, because it just it messes with your expectations of like Don's not a fighter. He was the coward.
Oh, I meant to ask: is the fight that they have as long as the Muhammad Ali fight? Is that something that is intentional?
I don't think it's as long. No.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was. I didn't know if that was something that they were doing that was meant to be kind of cheeky and on the nose, or if that was just I don't know.
Definitely cheeky on the nose, but I think in a way that works. Especially because you have Don kind of like Don does that all the time, where he's like on the wrong side of history in terms of like Westerns are better than space, where something like that. And in this he's just like, listen, he's methodical. He's trying to like prove to Peggy that like, oh, Ollie, you're not the greatest if you say it, and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's always the stuff I think I'm less enthused by. Like I always find it kind of grating when shows set in the past kind of do that thing where it's winking to the audience, where it's like, oh, this thing, it'll never take off or whatever, like that kind of deal. But
Pop-Tarts, those are unfrosted.
Right, yeah. I prefer the approach of when Lane and Don go to see Godzilla and they're like, this is very good. Like, I like that kind of thing.
That wasn't Godzilla, to be clear.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was, what was it?
The Gaiman, I forget.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so, anyway.
Well,
back
on...
Yeah,
on the subject of Tyson Liston, Ollie Liston, like, are you guys familiar with like the historical significance of that fight? I just asking.
Some of it, yeah.
I mean, that photo is the thing I'm most familiar with like Ollie.
We've been to Applebee's, like we've seen it on the wall.
Big. It's also like a very controversial fight because they think it's big.
Right. Like, well, they talk about that in the episode. What's his face? Yeah,
he's like, Clay won. Read the paper.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Phantom Punch is a big thing. So because they did so closely tie that in, like I remember the first time watching thinking like that was going to have significance of like Don was going to like be nice to Peggy and then like turn on her again or something like that. So it was interesting that, I don't know, that also messed with my expectations of tying that so closely into the episode.
Yeah, and the historical accuracy, like the details, as usual, are really good. Just in terms of like at this point, people were calling him Clay all the time. Like people weren't accepting him changing his name quite yet. And on top of that, they always in the show try to use like the actual recordings, and they try to really depict what it was like to experience this stuff. So when Don and Peggy are in the bar and they like are hearing it and it's kind of confusing, apparently that was like the most comprehensible recording that they could find, because it was just so like people were so confused by what had happened, and it was extremely hard to find something that wasn't too garbled, and they wanted that. They didn't want to recreate it, and I think that's really cool.
I did have to laugh at, you just hear like this garbled recording and Peggy's like, what happened? Don definitively was just like, I lost $200. Just knowing,
very dad move.
Right.
And they have a whole conversation too, about the baby, and like, when they're at the bar, and like it's such a funny heart to heart, at the diner scene before that, Don talks about Korea a bit, and it just seems like, yeah, part of it's the alcohol. Part of it is, I think, that he's a little bit drunk, but also I think that even subconsciously he knows Anna's gone, and he just wants somebody to know something about him, and he's been holding it up, and it at this point, like the filter is gone, and he's just putting that onto Peggy, because I think that he does see Peggy as, if not a daughter, just like an Anna, like a younger sister. Because Anna is the only family that Don really has.
So what you're saying is that Don is thinking about the future. So he was like, mask on, fuck it. Mask off.
Yeah, but I mean, you can argue then that there's that whole moment where Peggy like wakes up in her office and she's all disheveled, and then she goes into Don's office, and of course, he's like,
yeah, that was great.
He looks like $1 million. Very comedic moment. Which, by the way, in the commentaries, Winder points that out. He's like, that's like how alcoholics do it. That's a very true to alcoholic thing. But you do have that moment where you're like, oh, was this night just kind of like, was it a can't hardly wait? Where, we had some laughs, we goofed off, but like the sun came up, and now I'm going to be, we're going to go back to like me being Don, the hard ass. But there is that touch in the episode where he grabs her hand, and it's like a callback to episode 1 when Peggy tries to hold his hand. And it also kind of like reinforces this idea that like he is genuinely thankful. There was like a line of dialogue initially there where he says thank you to her, and they took it out because they were like, yeah, you don't need it. And I agree.
And again, I think it's really effective from a directorial standpoint that it communicates the affection, love, but it is extremely platonic. Like there's nothing about that moment that rings like, oh, like something's going to happen between these two, especially considering that this whole season, there is kind of an undercurrent of like, who's Don going to like get with at a certain point? Like who, like now that Betty's gone, like, is he going to try to replace her with somebody? Is he going to look in the office? Is he going to look outside of it? But you never really think like, oh, he's going to get with Peggy. Like there's maybe like a fluttering moment in this episode where it's like, I mean, they are equals in some respects, but like I think the episode's really good about establishing the love and respect that they form and have for each other without suggesting or making it feel like it's a romantic thing, but also not really playing a label on. Like you said, like it's not strictly like sibling like, it's not really father daughter like. It's kind of multifaceted.
You agree, Mike? You look like you don't agree.
I think, yeah, the multifaceted makes sense. I think when it comes to the relationship, like, I like to think about how much, like, different Don is his own kids. And so, like, whenever I hear about, like, father-daughter, all this, it's like, that would be low on the Don Draper totem pole. He does not give a shit. Like, I do think, like, peer mentorship is, like, a more respected and higher viewed thing in his brain because work trumps family in Don Draper's mind.
Yeah, because like watching him sob like that, you know that a lot of the pain that he's having is not just losing Anna, but like just remembering like he lost his brother, he lost his birth mother, his dad died right in front of him, which is brought up in this episode, which is kind of funny when Peggy is just like, oh, you're joking. And he's just like, no, like that actually happened. And Peggy tells him about how she saw her dad die, which has been kind of referenced before in the show. But there is that moment where Don is like referring to Anna as the only person who knew him, that really knew him. And when Peggy responds like, like that's not true. Part of it, you could be literal about it and just be like, well, yeah, Peggy, you don't know a lot about Don. But I think it's more like she's willing, that she's willing to know him, and he has shown that he is willing to let her in, and that this could be the start of something a little bit better. Will it be? It's Mad Men. Who knows? Like it's the 60s. Something crazy is going to happen in like a minute. But at least there's like that moment of hope, Rest in peace, Anna Draper. Hardly knew you. And I know, Will, this was inevitable. I assume that you probably kind of picked up on like that's kind of what was going on here down to like, the very beginning of the episode when they bring it up and you're like, oh, yeah. So I get, the tension, right, of like he's avoiding the phone call. And
right. And I mean, establishing earlier in the season that she was sick and that there is a finality to his visit to California. Yeah, I mean, it's that scene is really heartbreaking. I mean, it is some of John Hamm's best acting, I think, by far. Probably some of the best acting we've seen from him since in season 3 when he gets found out from Betty and he has like the kind of conflicting range of emotions. And I think it's really fascinating that even in that moment, like even when he kind of drops the Don Draper persona and becomes Dick Whitman for Betty for the first time, like it still feels less vulnerable than this moment with Peggy.
Yeah, I agree. And man, John Hamm, he's just so also good at playing a drunk. Like when he's just like sitting there, like slumped up, he feels so pathetic. And it's just like, you have to remember that, like, oh yeah, he's completely sober right now in real life. The commentaries confirm that. They're like, John Hamm, like, he's just really good at playing drunk. Go figure. But he's not actually drunk ever in the show.
He is a former. He I think is an alcoholic, or he like stopped drinking around college. I don't really want to dive too deeply into the whole reason for that because it's a whole thing. But
I think that's still a hard thing to tap into. Yeah. Even if, like I don't want to take that away from the guy and put him on blast, Will Ashton. Yeah, because I think he had an issue with like a fraternity thing.
Yeah.
That had to do.
That's putting it mildly.
Yes, yes.
That fraternity was shut down because of it.
Well, don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay.
Did either of you read the carousel?
I did. I think it's really fascinating that it's one of the shortest chapters in the book, and there's no footnotes.
100%. But it does point out like the whole hand thing, which I didn't like ever connect in either viewing I had of the episode, which is fun.
Yeah, especially it's kind of interesting how when people like talk about this episode, like I think even with us, it's like it's just like an episode you have to watch. Like you have to feel it out. It's like you can talk about it, but you're gonna be like, yeah, that moment happened. And it was very emotional. But like, I don't know. It's like not the typical Mad Men episode where like it doesn't have a ton of trivia and the commentaries. Like they honestly are just like watching the episode and being like, wow, this turned out a lot better than we expected. And literally at the very end, Weiner is just like, hey, great job, guys. Like, how did we do that? Like, they're kind of like surprised, just as surprised as everybody else is that it's just kind of a little bit of magic that came our way.
When you say in the commentary that the conversation is mainly dictated by Matthew Weiner, is that because the other guy just is like sitting back and reflecting on it, or is it like he wants to say things and Weiner is just like, yeah, another thing?
It's a little bit of both, probably. I mean, Weiner talks a lot, and like because the episode's moving, and he wants to capture everything, and it's always like that in the commentaries. Like you can definitely tell, like it changes a bit when you have a certain person on who does have a big personality. So like if you have Weiner and John Hamm, like it's going to be way more of a conversation. But Weiner does try. He tries to be like, oh hey, you worked on this. Like, oh yeah, what did you think when David Carbonara wrote this cue? And like. So he does try to do it because he realizes he's talking too much, but they can be a little shy because they're doing a commentary with their boss. So it's a little bit like, they don't want to step on him. And he also, he has a lot of information that he just kind of wants to blast out. The other commentary, which is very good as well, it's one of the very few solo commentaries. It's just Elizabeth Moss. And she is talking about the episode, recording it not from Pasadena, where they do all this stuff, but she's actually recording it from, I think, London. Because at the time she was in a play and stuff. So it's interesting. Yeah, she's just kind of like, but again, like not really talking about what it was like to make the episode necessarily, but she talks just more about like what she was trying to do with the character. And it's very good. It's just really her talking about like the acting process and like how she brings herself to these places. And little fun things too of like how they had to like choose her dress because it was going to be the same dress like in the daytime scenes and then of course all throughout the night, and it kind of had to pull off a lot with like one piece of clothing, and it's like stuff you don't usually think about, but obviously like as soon as it gets brought up you're like, oh yeah, that's really important. So yeah, highly recommend as usual the commentaries. They're always good to watch/listen to. Do you guys believe in ghosts? This was like a whole thing in the commentary. Mike said yeah.
No,
Mike said no. Mike does not believe in ghosts. Will, he's more hesitant. I don't think he's...
I don't know. I mean, there are some things that are unexplainable, but I am also just a fairly agnostic person. I try not to assume things about the world and the universe and all the outer realms. I am open. I mean, more likely than not, there probably aren't ghosts, but I don't know. I think there are a lot of things haunting Don and Peggy in this episode. Like, that's fair to say.
Well, I just bring it up because there's that moment where Don wakes up and he sees Anna's ghost, and Weiner has this kind of like a switch turns, and he's just like, all right, look, I've seen a ghost before. And apparently he's like, it's a little bit of like, all right, Ghostbusters, calm down. But like, he does have like a little bit of a nerd out of like, apparently he has this whole thing where he believes in it. But aside from that, I really love that whole moment because like, there's no music. There's not a lot of just noise. It's just kind of her with the suitcase. And then I think what I like about it the most is it's just earnest. You know, the smile on her face. You see that like she's walking normally again. And obviously I think you should probably read that as like, this is Dawn kind of like having that feeling that she's gone, and like that intuition, which is a real thing. Like a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, they can feel like when that person is gone or something.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that, of course, informed by, circumstance. Yeah. I don't want to get too highfalutin for the spirituality stuff, but yeah, it's just a good scene. It's just a very good. I think they nailed it. It was just the right balance.
I have two things I wanted to say about this. One, I really love, similar to Sopranos with Weiner in the later seasons when he worked on that show. I really love when both these shows get kind of more existential and more psychological and spiritual. Like one of my favorite episodes is when, so far at least, is when Betty is giving birth to Jean, and there's like that kind of transcendent kind of moment where she's like in this kind of like spiritual, existential kind of thing. I really like that, and I really love when Sopranos does similar things. I can imagine that it's probably more divisive for different fans of both shows, but I'm a fan of those moments. The other thing is, I mean, I kind of figured they weren't going to do this, but there was a part of me that did wonder if that was going to inform Don's pitch at the end. Like when he sees Anna like that, and like he was going to like write something like blank suitcase for the now or something, like some sort of thing where it's like him, like this major life event informs his pitch. I wasn't fully believing that was going to be the case, but I also like, considering how much this episode's the idea of like these two people can't really escape work and can't like turn it off necessarily. I was kind of wondering if that was going to be an influence on Dawn for this pitch, but I don't know. Was that something you guys were thinking about when you watched it originally or this time or whatever?
A little bit. I thought they were going to lean more into the like, what do you need a suitcase for? The place where you're going. Kind of similar to the ad that they did for Mohawk Airlines. Quite honestly, like, what did you bring me, Daddy? Like, open up the suitcase. There's a toy or something, and it's Samsonite, so that means it's protected. Which actually kind of dovetails a little bit into the Danny Strong character comes back, and like this is his idea, and he's actually doing. Like he pitched an idea that Don liked. Like Samsonite's tough and all that. Peggy doesn't like the idea, which I think is what's causing the issues. Like her ideas of like, we'll drop it off the Eiffel Tower, like all that nonsense. But yeah, I think that there is something to like, okay, so how do you sell the Samsonite suitcase? I guess like what makes it different from the competition? I think that's actually why the football commercial was kind of funny, because like the moment where like all the other suitcases like explode when they get pushed around and everything. At least that's something. At least that's communicating a message. But it is weird to connect suitcases to football. It is.
Mike, are you okay? Like, you just seem to be really like existentially just like drifting out.
I think the ghost thing kind of freaked me out.
Yeah.
It's ghosting got me, boys. I'm just looking around. I'm feeling a little. I'm just trying to protect myself.
It is 9 a.m. on a Saturday, so just it's the darkest
hour. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. I don't have too much else. I feel like we really covered a lot. I wish we could have gotten some of like Freddie Rumsen and Cal Rutledge from Ponds with Roger. So like Roger being surrounded by the two sober dudes, and the Indian Arrowheads thing. I think it's just such a funny line. And Roger having to sneak off to fortify himself. That said, though, there is something to be said about how when Don is feeling this way, when Don is feeling like I have to not, like he wants to avoid this call and stuff, he doesn't want to be around Roger. And Roger is his friend. Roger is somebody who got him where he is, and I think he respects Roger usually. But they don't have that same kind of connection, right? Like the thing that he has with Peggy, he just doesn't have it with Roger. And I've definitely thought a lot about like why that is. I just think that part of it is he has resentment toward Roger still. And, even though he, I think at a certain point he looked up to Roger and everything. And I think he likes being around Roger because he's a buddy. But I think we've all had that friend that we don't open up to. Because like, especially in Don's case, like he's gotten in trouble opening up to Roger before. It caused Roger's divorce. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I land with that.
Yeah, I think that, and I also just don't think that Don respects Roger professionally that much. Like he definitely respects Peggy as a
Yeah.
colleague more than he does Roger, for sure.
He respects Roger's money.
But also, I mean, Roger is one of the few characters at this point, I think, who's like, at least that's close to Dawn, that has absolutely no awareness or knowledge of the Dick Whitman thing, right?
Well, Peggy doesn't know.
Well, I know, but like Peggy's at least like more aware of Dawn in an emotional sense. Like, not only is Roger like but like, how would he even begin to explain like Anna to Roger? Like, I don't even know how he could do that in a way that would be emotionally cathartic and satisfying for him.
And nor do I think that he would want to or think to, you know? It's just like, I think when he's sad and upset, like he doesn't want to be around the guy who's always obsessed with making everyone around him laugh. So, I think that plays a big part.
Semi-related to that, but something I didn't want to forget is I really like how the bathroom scene, the women's bathroom scenes in this mirror, no pun intended, the stuff from the second episode of season
that gets
1.
brought up in the commentary because, you know, Peggy kind of looks down on the girls who are crying in the bathroom, and this is the episode where she cries in the bathroom.
Right, and I really love that shot of her crying in the bathroom and like its focus on her reflection in the mirror. I thought that was a great shot. Great moment. Yeah.
I like the moment where she's in the men's room and she's a little curious. She's kind of like, for a good time, call Caroline, who was Roger's secretary. I just love that.
Yeah. Looking at the urinals, like, what are those for?
She's like about to touch it. I also really like the juxtaposition between Peggy's like work colleagues at this office and at Sterling Cooper, because you get a little, now that you have Danny Strong's character in it, you do kind of have this like boys club that like Peggy is inexplicably in charge of, that, you know, they all kind of roast each other, and it's such a different energy. Like you can't imagine her getting up to these hijinks with Paul and Sal. You know what I mean? It's just so different.
Yeah, it's like she's the Wendy to their Lost Boys.
Yeah. It's like she's got her own Goonies squad with her, and just like I love their rapport, especially like when Stan just like wakes her up with the whistle, like drop it, give me 20. Like, maggot. It's just too funny. Funny episode. We haven't actually like given this episode enough credit for how hilarious it is. It's continuing, I think. Yeah, Will shrugs, but I think
half the time I've been talking about how funny it is. Like, what are you talking about?
Lower your voice, please.
Yeah.
You're gonna freak out Mike again. That's a roach.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
But I just love how we really have slid into the comedy era of Mad Men, where, and this season really is where it picks up, because like especially compare it to season 1, you really don't have that same kind of like sense of humor in season 1.
Oh, come on. What about the time the guy tackles his secretary and like pulls her pants up to guess what color her panties were? Dude, that was hilarious.
Yeah, it was sure hilarious, Mike.
In a more sincere way, I don't know if I do think it is a little bit more comfortable in the comedy, but there is like stuff in like Roger puking in the office and stuff that is deliberately funny in the first couple
seasons.
But I would agree that there may be a little bit fewer and far between in the earlier seasons compared to now. Or Roger, or not Roger, Bert going into the office saying "Happy Birthday" and stuff like that. That, you know, it definitely has comedic moments in there. I don't want to shortchange those scenes.
Fair enough. I do want to bring up too, because I kind of glossed over it before, but one quick thing with Duck, just that there is the moment where, you know, Don now knows that Duck and Peggy had an affair. And there's the moment where he just kind of looks at her and he's just like, I don't care. And, you know, the commentary is they're saying, it's like, yeah, of course Don doesn't care and all that. And my read on it too is I just think that he's so embarrassed in this moment. You know, he just puked in the toilet in front of her. He has puke on his shirt. Duck just overpowered him. And I think he's just kind of looking at the situation. He's just like, lady, he's got enough to deal with. You know, I think they even say that in the commentary. It's like, yeah, he's got a lot going on. Like, I think he just genuinely isn't. Obviously, I doubt he likes it, but I doubt he just doesn't seem that bothered by it. It's like, yeah, he used to date Duck. It's weird, whatever. And then moves on. And then I really like that. He move forward, He'll be shocked how much this didn't happen. I'm sure it's going through his head. And I'm sure Peggy wishes it was the case for her.
I think that line in particular is what makes me kind of surprised that Don's willing to discuss the lost baby with Peggy. Like, he's the one that was so adamant being like, move on, don't think about this. And now he's like,
because that was Dick Whitman.
Remember, sure, yeah.
I think that was a Dick Whitman moment, and characters are like that. Like, sometimes when you write a character, you think that like this character is like this, and they never do this, but really, it's this character is like this, and will only do this if, and like that's how you like create a complex layered character of like it's not that they would never have it, a moment of like recognizing the past. It's like, well, what would bring them to that moment? So
you did see Inside Out too.
I did. It was cute. I liked it a lot. I had a little moment with Inside Out too.
Yeah, where in your head you went, I'm a good person.
Well, I was already doing that. I'm a good podcast host. I'm a good friend. Thanks so much for listening to Mad Men Men, and I'm sure that won't spoil it since this will probably come out once Inside Out 3 hits theaters. By the way, they're good.
Sorry, I'm going to give one quick Hannah plug. My wife is very funny accidentally sometimes. Like, I was talking about like what's going to happen when she starts getting horny and stuff, and I joked that it was going to be called like Inside Out 69, and she said more like Inside 69. Get it? Get it?
That was a much more crass Inside Out joke than I was expecting, but I like it. But yeah, no, when we put out the episode this week for not public relations, Christmas comes but once a year, and there's this whole thing where Will's pretending to be Santa Claus, and it's really weird.
Oh, you hated that. You hated that bit, John.
We recorded that in January. And Will is just like, I think maybe it was Will, somebody says like, this like won't come out until July or something like that. And we beat it by 1 month.
Wow.
Came out in June.
I don't know what you're talking about though. That was actually Santa Claus. Like I was very inactive in that episode. I have to say that was a real life Santa Claus.
The next episode of Mad Men, I have it right here. The Summer Man. Now that's timely because we are in the middle of summer, boys. And I don't want Will Ashton, I don't want you to feel like, okay, well, it's all downhill from here. There are more episodes of Mad Men that I think rival, if not surpass, the Suitcase. Suitcase gets a lot of the gold, the hype and everything, but don't worry. We got some good stuff coming ahead as well. Mike, you back me up on this?
Yeah, that's the thing about Mad Men is that it doesn't really have a peak. It just kind of has like a summit.
Yeah, and I think there are episodes of Mad Men that have moments that are better than entire episodes. So like, I think Suitcase gets regarded this way because it's a whole episode that's just really good from beginning to end. Whereas there are other Mad Men episode moments that are like, oh, that same quality. So you at least have that to look forward to, I think. But okay.
I'm just personally looking forward to all of the similar stories you two have for your Disneyland trip with a certain Disneyland trip that will be upcoming. Oh,
I am going to Disney World next month.
Oh, that's nice.
Sorry, Will.
No, okay. I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah. You happen to be in Florida.
Right, yeah. I mean, I was going to say to that point, like, not that, like, these episodes don't deserve the acclaim or notice, but I do notice, like, a lot of times, like, the episodes that people bring up as, like, oh, like, this is the best episode are always, like, the ones that like, have big moments, like Ozymandias from Breaking Bad, or, like, Connor's wedding from Succession, or, like, not, I get that, like, they're very good episodes, but it's, like, kind of, is it more the quality episode, or is it more just, like, this big thing happened, and, like, now the show's not going to be the same? I don't know. It's hard to say.
No, that's exactly how I feel sometimes. Because to me, like, what's a great episode of Community, right? People will be like, oh, paintball, because then Community changed forever. And then I kind of look at that and I'm like, well, I don't know. For me, I just really like that Law and Order episode. It's just really dumb and funny.
The butt crack bandit?
Yeah. It's Ass Crack Bandit, of course.
Excuse me.
Even like the cooperative calligraphy, their bottle episode. And hey, Dungeons and Dragons is back on streaming.
Dungeons and Dragons 1. That's
they brought it back.
But I think a lot of people say that. It is honestly really good.
Did you guys have anything else before we say goodbye until next time? I think we covered it.
Guys, it's my birthday. I have to go.
Actually, you know what?
Yeah, that would have been a great bit. I mean, my birthday was fairly recently, so I was thinking about that. So
yeah, it's like we want to still keep talking about Mad Men. I feel like we could kind of keep this going, you know?
Go call Hannah.
It's 9 a.m. She's waiting at brunch. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be back soon to talk about Mad Men as men.